What if the most powerful military trap in the world was sprung not by the attacker but by the defender? Iran thought it was making a bold move. It thought it was sending a message. But what it actually did was hand the United States the one thing American war planners had been waiting years to receive. And now the military infrastructure Iran spent 2 decades building, hidden underground, buried in rock, kept silent to avoid detection, is gone. Not weakened, gone. Before we go any further, if you follow geopolitics and want the real story behind the headlines, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the bell. Share this with one person who thinks they understand what's happening in the Middle East, because what we're about to break down changes everything. Let's start with the moment that triggered all of this. Iran didn't just make one bad decision. It made several. Proxy attacks on UAE soil, a commando unit inserted into Kuwait that ended in a firefight with Kuwaiti defense forces, a military exercise launched during a ceasefire that was literally named after martyrdom, a counteroffer letter to the United States so aggressive and so dismissive that American officials described it publicly as garbage. Each of these was a problem, each of these had consequences, but none of them on their own crossed the specific line that makes a conflict fundamentally irreversible. What crossed that line was the decision to launch a coordinated, multi-directional military attack against 3 United States Navy-guided missile destroyers passing through the Strait of Hormuz. And here is where the story gets extraordinarily interesting, because that attack didn't do what Iran thought it would do. It didn't damage a single American ship. It didn't produce a single American casualty. What it did instead was something far more consequential for Iran than any short-term military victory could ever have been. It completed a targeting database that American intelligence had spent years trying to build. Think about that for a moment. For 20 years, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, had been one of the most disciplined military forces on the planet when it came to electronic silence. They built their underground missile cities beneath Qeshm Island and across the coastal defense network near Bandar Abbas. Billions of dollars, years of tunneling through hard rock. The entire strategic logic of going underground was to stay invisible. You cannot strike what you cannot find, and for 2 decades they were very good at staying hidden. But the moment Iran decided to attack those 3 destroyers, every system it had spent 20 years keeping quiet activated at the same time. Coastal anti-ship missile batteries powered on. Drone swarms launched from hidden positions. Fast attack boats emerged from concealed harbors. Ballistic missile systems began preparation sequences. Every radar switched on to acquire targets. Every command node began transmitting to coordinate the assault, and in the skies above, American EA-18G Growler aircraft had been quietly circling for hours, collecting, recording, mapping every signal, every radar emission, every communication frequency, every launch position. The moment Iran activated its full attack package, it handed over a complete, real-time blueprint of its own military infrastructure. In minutes, positions that had been deliberately hidden for 20 years were located, identified, and logged. The attack itself was a failure by every operational measure. The 3 American destroyers, the USS Truxtun, USS Rafael Peralta, and USS Mason, completed their transit of the Strait of Hormuz without a single mark on any hull. The Aegis combat systems aboard those ships tracked every incoming missile. Standard interceptors knocked down the aerial threats. Close-in weapon systems handled anything that got closer. The MH-60 Seahawk helicopters that lifted off the destroyer decks during the engagement hunted down and destroyed the fast attack boat swarms trying to close in. The drone swarms dropped into the waters of the Gulf of Oman. The attack achieved nothing it was designed to achieve, but it achieved something Iran never modeled as part of its risk calculation. It gave the United States every address it needed. Several hours later, as darkness settled over the Persian Gulf, American fighter jets filled the skies above the Hormuz coastline. What followed was not impulsive retaliation. It was not a proportional tap on the shoulder designed to send a message while leaving Iran's capabilities mostly intact. What followed was a systematic, methodical, precisely targeted dismantling of the specific infrastructure that Iran's attack had just finished revealing. Let's talk about Bandar Abbas first, because to understand what happened there, you need to understand what Bandar Abbas actually was. This is not simply a port city. Bandar Abbas was the central nervous system of everything the IRGC's naval strategy depended on. The main headquarters for Iranian Navy surface operations, the deep-water port that had served for years as the incubation center for Iran's entire asymmetric maritime warfare doctrine. Every fast attack boat swarm, every mine-laying operation, every anti-ship missile battery coordination across the strait, all of it was directed from here. The large Iranian frigates Jamaran and Sahand were commanded from this location. The logistical supply network sustaining IRGC maritime operations were concentrated here. The coastal anti-ship missile launch ramps threatening commercial and naval shipping through the strait's northern approaches were positioned here. The hidden stockpiles of Silkworm and Sunburn anti-ship missiles, the guidance systems for the C-801 series, the radar arrays scanning the full width of the strait, all of it, here, American precision missiles turned Bandar Abbas into a different place. The logistical depots burned. The command centers went dark. The launch ramps were destroyed. The guidance networks were shredded. The radar infrastructure that had been watching the strait for decades stopped watching. The operational brain that had been directing Iran's naval presence in the Strait of Hormuz stopped functioning. Bandar Abbas was the heart of Iran's Hormuz strategy. The counterstrike stopped its beating. Qeshm Island was next. And Qeshm Island was, in many ways, the most strategically significant target of all, because of what had been built beneath it over the past 2 decades. Qeshm is the largest island in the Persian Gulf. It sits inside the strait itself, not beside it, giving whoever controls it the ability to project force across the entire navigable channel. On the surface, it once looked like a tourist destination, a place with beaches and historical sites. Beneath the surface, the IRGC had spent years excavating a military fortress. Dozens of kilometers of concrete-reinforced tunnels carved into the island's hard geology. Underground missile launch silos designed with retractable covers so they could surface, fire, and retract before overhead sensors could lock on. Stockpiles of Qadir anti-ship missiles, Nasser-1 missiles, K-bar ballistic missiles, all stored in underground geometries specifically engineered to survive the kind of airstrikes that destroy above-ground targets. Command and control nodes coordinating the island's role as a forward platform inside the strait itself. IRGC commanders had publicly described these underground missile cities as their greatest strategic asset in controlling the Strait of Hormuz. They said it with pride. American bunker-penetrating munitions found the tunnel entrances. JDAM bombs destroyed the hidden radar installations that had been feeding targeting data to the island's missile systems. The Shahed drone launch infrastructure was eliminated before the drones stored inside could be deployed. The strikes on Qeshm were comprehensive enough that the island, Iran's stationary aircraft carrier, the forward fortress inside the strait, the underground missile city the IRGC had spent billions building, ceased to function as a military asset. The largest island in the Persian Gulf, the greatest strategic investment in strait control, neutralized in a single operational night. The third major target was the Shahid Rajeh naval base near Sirik, a facility whose importance was somewhat less visible in public coverage, but was fully understood by military planners. This base was the Eastern Gateway. Every commercial vessel approaching the strait from the Gulf of Oman side, every oil tanker inbound from the Arabian Sea, every cargo ship coming from Asian markets passed within the radar coverage of this installation first. Before any other Iranian monitoring system could detect an inbound vessel, Sirik's early warning network saw it. This base held the intelligence collection infrastructure that told the IRGC what was approaching, when, from what direction, at what speed, and with what draft. Without that information, the IRGC's fast attack boat commanders were operating blind in the approaches. Without early warning, mine-laying operations couldn't be timed to maximize damage to incoming traffic. Without targeting data from Sirik, the coastal missile batteries had nothing to shoot at. American fighter jets worked through the coastal defense systems and radar nodes of the Sirik complex methodically. One by one, the intelligence nodes went offline. The radar coverage collapsed. The Eastern Gateway that had given the IRGC complete awareness of every approach from the Gulf of Oman became a blind spot. The eyes went dark. When the fires at Bandar Abbas, Qeshm Island, and Sirik eventually died down, supporting nodes at Bandar Kamir and Minab, which had coordinated fast attack boat operations and served as command checkpoints for the maritime harassment campaign, had been addressed in the same operational cycle. Now pause here and think about the scale of what just happened. The scale of the American operation that night is visible in a single detail. 5 aerial refueling tankers were simultaneously airborne from Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE, creating what was effectively a floating fuel bridge in the sky above the Gulf. You don't keep 5 tankers in the air at the same time for a quick hit-and-run strike. You keep 5 tankers aloft when you are running sustained multi-wave operations across multiple target complexes over an extended period. The fighter jets weren't making single passes over their targets and heading home. They were loitering, coming back, working through targeting lists with patience. The carrier air wings of the USS George H.W. Bush and USS Abraham Lincoln were fully integrated into the operation. F-35 stealth fighters approached target complexes along corridors that the Growler aircraft had already cleared by blinding Iranian radar systems, transmitting on frequencies the Iranians believed only they knew, turning every radar screen on the Qeshm coastline dark simultaneously. Super Hornets provided precision strike capability across the target packages the F-35S had established approach authority over. The entire integrated architecture of American air combat capability worked in coordinated sequence through the night. If you've made it this far and you're learning something you won't hear on mainstream news, this is your moment. Drop a comment below with the word Hormuz, so I know you're watching, and you hit the like button hard, and forward this video to someone who needs to understand what's actually happening right now. Real analysis doesn't go viral on its own. You make it happen. CENTCOM's public statement after the engagement was careful and precise. American forces had intercepted an unprovoked attack and responded with self-defense strikes against Iranian military facilities responsible for those attacks. The specific language matters. Every facility struck had been used to generate the attack that authorized the American response. That framing was not diplomatic hedging. It was a deliberate legal articulation that categorized the entire operation as defensive action under international law and designated every target as a legitimate military objective. The White House was less restrained in its public messaging. If Iran did not understand that it had been militarily defeated, the statement went, it would be hit harder than it had ever been hit before. That message was aimed at three audiences at once: the Iranian regime and the IRGC command structure, the American public watching to understand the sequence of provocation and response, and the international community, particularly European governments that had been pushing for de-escalation and needed to understand why the military response happened. Here is the diplomatic context that makes this moment even heavier than the military analysis alone can capture. In the days immediately before this engagement, a summit between the American and Chinese presidents produced a joint declaration with two core statements. Iran cannot be allowed to acquire a nuclear weapon, and the Strait of Hormuz must be reopened for global energy commerce. China, Iran's most important economic partner and diplomatic shield, had co-signed the two fundamental American positions on Iran in the same news cycle. Chinese financial regulators had instructed banks to pause loans to Iranian refineries that had been the primary channel for Chinese purchases of discounted Iranian crude. The diplomatic isolation that American maximum pressure strategy was designed to create had just taken its most significant step forward. And into this specific moment, with China shifting its position, with international pressure tightening, with a negotiated framework still technically available, the IRGC launched its attack on 3 American destroyers. The attack produced the exact opposite of its intended effect. Instead of demonstrating Iranian military power and creating international pressure for accommodation on Iranian terms, it demonstrated the gap between what Iran claims its military can do and what it can actually accomplish. It demonstrated the precision and scale of the American counterattack capability. It showed the world that the United States could execute simultaneous strikes against multiple target complexes in a single operational night, while the 3 ships that had been attacked continued transit without a dent in their hulls. Every capital watching this updated its strategic assessment in the same direction. The IRGC's entire asymmetric maritime doctrine. The doctrine built on the premise that cheap weapons in large numbers could impose costs on expensive American naval assets high enough that Washington would eventually decide the strategic price of Gulf operations wasn't worth paying. That doctrine failed its first serious test against the system specifically designed to defeat it. The 600-kilometer Iranian coastline had been designed as a kill zone. The network of islands woven together with coastal missile batteries, fast attack boat staging areas, radar arrays, and underground missile cities was designed to make the Strait of Hormuz impassable without Iranian permission. The kill zone's most capable infrastructure, the pieces that actually made it lethal, was what the counterstrikes addressed at Bandar Abbas, Qeshm, Sirik, Bandar Kamir, and Manab. The kill zone is significantly less lethal than it was before that night. What remains is real. The Mosquito fleet of fast attack boats, dispersed across dual-use ports along the coastline, still exists. Some portion of the Shahid drone inventory stored in underground facilities that survived the strikes remains. Mobile ballistic missile launchers that were moved from known positions during the ceasefire period are still out there. Submarines remain deployed in the shallow waters of the strait. These are not nothing. A fast attack boat carrying a C-802 Nor missile can punch through a frigate's hull. A drone that makes it past the intercept envelope can start fires at a refinery terminal that take weeks to put out. A mini-submarine in shallow water presents a targeting problem that is genuinely different and difficult. The threat is not zero, but these are what remain after the engagement reduced the command and control infrastructure, destroyed the primary strike platforms, eliminated the most capable anti-ship missile batteries, and sealed the underground forward staging facilities that were the heart of Iran's entire Hormuz strategy. The question now is what Iran does with this reality. Inside Iran, in the immediate aftermath of the strikes, something unusual happened. Iranian commanders whose communication lines with command centers had been severed by the strikes didn't initially know what had happened to their own assets. The information picture inside Tehran was confused by the timing. In the days before the counterstrikes, the UAE had absorbed a massive Iranian missile and drone barrage that sparked large fires in the Fujairah industrial zone. When explosions began appearing along the Hormuz coastline, there was a period where the Iranian administration was trying to calculate whether the UAE had launched its own retaliatory attack against IRGC targets. It was not the UAE. The UAE Defense Ministry watched in silence. When it became clear that the power-dismantling IRGC infrastructure along the Hormuz coast was directly the United States, Iranian state media executed the only information operation available to it. The IRGC-affiliated outlets described the explosions as routine air defense exercises. The same outlets that had published celebration headlines when Iran launched the attack on the 3 destroyers were now describing the visible destruction of the facilities that generated that attack as planned activities. The problem is that this doesn't hold. The destruction at Bandar Abbas and Qeshm Island and Sirik is physical. It is visible. Iranian civilians living in those coastal regions can see with their own eyes what happened to those facilities regardless of what state media reports. The gap between the information environment the regime is trying to maintain and the observable physical reality of the counterstrikes grows every day with every conversation between someone who saw the fires and someone who only heard the official story. That gap does not close, it widens. A framework for resolution still technically exists. The Memorandum of Understanding that has been moving through Pakistani diplomatic channels offers Iran a 30-day negotiation window with specific conditions attached: immediate opening of the strait, restraint of proxy forces, halt of nuclear program activities, sharp cutoff of funding for Hezbollah and associated militant networks. The terms are still on the table. The military price of not accepting them has just been demonstrated at the highest level of precision and force the American military has applied in this theater. The tension inside Iran over what to do next runs along a fault line that has been visible throughout this crisis. The IRGC's institutional interest does not point toward accepting those terms. Accepting them ends the wartime conditions under which the IRGC's domestic political authority reaches its peak. Conflict, or at least the ongoing threat of conflict, is the environment in which the IRGC consolidates power and resources inside Iran. Peace, on IRGC terms that don't actually address the nuclear program or the strait, was always the preferred outcome. But real peace with real concessions, that shrinks the IRGC's domestic relevance. The civilian government's calculation points differently. The Iranian central bank's private communications suggest an understanding that the financial mathematics of continued refusal produces an outcome worse than acceptance. The cost is running at roughly $500 million a day in economic damage. China is beginning to reduce oil purchases. The sanctions architecture is tightening. The international coalition that Iran had counted on to fracture is instead holding, and with the Beijing Declaration actually expanding. Iran has two options left. It can accept the terms of a framework that ends the conflict while addressing the nuclear question, the strait question, and the proxy question at the same time. Or it can watch the next phase of the American military campaign work through the targets that the initial operation left unaddressed. The history of this region carries an instructive parallel. In July 1988, Ayatollah Khomeini accepted a ceasefire he described privately as more bitter than drinking poison. He accepted it because the alternative was watching the rest of the Iranian Navy follow the portion that had already gone to the bottom of the Gulf. The IRGC's command structure today is facing a version of that same calculation. The underground missile cities at Qeshm have sealed tunnel entrances. Bandar Abbas is no longer the operational command brain it was. Sirik is a blind spot where it used to be an eye. B-2 bombers are running training missions replicating the flight profiles used to deliver bunker-penetrating munitions against hardened underground facilities. The deal is on the table. The clock is running, and here is the question that the coming days will begin to answer. Will the IRGC's command structure look at the combined weight of what the counterstrikes produced militarily and what the Beijing summit produced diplomatically, and make the calculation Khomeini made in 1988? Or will it choose the other path? Because the other path has a name: Operation Sledgehammer, and the targets it was built for are the 30% that the first phase of military action deliberately left standing specifically so that there would still be something left to destroy if Iran chose wrong. 3 American destroyers crossed the Strait of Hormuz. They were attacked, they came through without a scratch, the drone swarms fell into the sea. The underground missile cities Iran spent 20 years building in secrecy are now either destroyed or compromised. Bandar Abbas, the operational nerve center of a naval doctrine built to choke the world's most critical energy choke point, struck. Eastern early warning gateway that gave the IRGC its eyes on everything approaching from the Gulf of Oman blind. Iran built the most sophisticated coastal military trap in the modern world. It took 20 years and billions of dollars. It was hidden underground, kept electronically silent, designed to spring on any force that dared challenge Iranian control of the strait. And then, in a single night, Iran sprang the trap on itself. The deal is still on the table. The question is whether the people sitting in the bunkers in Tehran understand what the morning after looks like if they keep saying no. If this video gave you a clearer picture of what's actually happening, not the headlines, but the real strategic story, then share it. One share from you puts this analysis in front of people who are only getting half the truth from mainstream sources. And if you want the next breakdown the moment it drops, you know what to do. Subscribe and stay sharp.